Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everybody. Please take a seat. We'll start this third session in the afternoon. Please take a seat. I am delighted to be moderating this session. My name is Hippolyte D'ALBIS. We are going to talk about demographics. But, you know, often people think that demographics is a long-term thing. That first, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, because the evils of demography are pretty simple and straightforward. There are three main variables. For those of you who, like me, are a bit into mathematics, well, we like simple modeling, you know. So there are three variables. So there's birth, there's death, and there's migration. Very simple. Great, really. So we shall discuss these three variables that are supposed to be simple between inverted commas, but they have impacts on our world, on our economies, on the way of the world, on the transformation of the world. This is all but simple. And it has also political repercussions, of course. So before I introduce this session and our panelists, I'd like to thank our guests, our panelists. And we have one person, Mr. Fang, who's supposed to be following this remotely. Professor CAI is at the Academy of Social Science in China. So he'll be making his presentation remotely. I think we're still trying to secure the link up here. Pandu SJAHRIR. Hello, Pandu. You are an entrepreneur from Indonesia. And it's true that relations between Indonesia and France are excellent. We were discussing it at the beginning of this session. And in terms of military cooperation, but not only on energy cooperation as well. It is our pleasure also to welcome Paolo ARTINI from the High Commissioner, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and Ms. Martine VASSAL. Thank you for being here, Madam. You are at the head of the ex-Marseille metropolitan area. A few figures. You know, demographers love their figures. And they love quantifying phenomena. It is the first social science to have ever quantified, you know, mortality tables back in the 19th century, and they never stop. So we always start discussing demography with figures, and they shed some light on the extent to which the world is poised to be transformed by demographics. So look at the 18 to 64-year-olds. So let's say that if there are 100 people around the world, 62 would live in Asia, 13 would live in Europe and in North America, and 12 would live in Africa. So you see this distribution demonstrating the importance of Asia, which is why we're delighted to have two representatives from Asia. But based on the UN forecasts and that distribution, that breakdown will change completely. By the end of the century, according to the UN, Asia would represent no longer 62, but 42%. So a considerable drop. Europe and North America would go from 13 to 10. So we would only represent 10% of labor force or working age population. And Africa would go from 14% to 42%. So you see, it's a sheer upheaval, really. And so a dramatic change of the distribution of working age population. The second point I wanted to make is that demographic inequalities are absolutely dire. We talk a lot about economic inequalities, political inequalities, social inequalities, but we often disregard discussing demographic inequalities. Look at life expectancy. Life expectancy of a Japanese woman is 88. The life expectancy of a Somali woman is 68. A 20-year gap. That is really considerable, and we often underestimate the impact of that inequality. Depending where I was born, I stand a chance to live longer. There are inequalities in terms of fertility as well in Spain or in other countries. So 1.2 children per woman, extremely low levels. Whereas in Mali, we'll almost reach 5.9 children per woman. So these differences, and it only takes a 2-hour flight to go from one country to another, and even so, there are really stark inequalities. And the other dynamics that's at play that may result from this is how the population structure changes over time. You know that we look at the difference between birth rate and death rate and migratory flows, so difference between people between immigrants and immigrants. If we look at the OECD countries, well, actually, the dynamics created by migratory flows completely prevails and outstrips difference between births and deaths. So the dynamics behind changes in the population derives from migratory flows. And it has to do with an aging population and the deaths of baby boom generation. And there's a recent national French statistics study that says that amongst the under 60 in France, 1/3 of the population was either a migrant themselves or of migrant descent. Could be second or third generation migrant. And changes are really very fast changes, and because of their sheer magnitude, they have really an impact on the way of the world. So I'll start with Professor CAI. Can you hear us, Professor?
Okay, this is great. Okay, merci beaucoup, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. So you are going to tell us about changes in Chinese population and demographics in China. Over to you, sir.
C'est à vous.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Hippolyte. Good afternoon, everybody. Under the topic of this session and based on China's experiences, I'll speak of a few facts on demographic transition in China and its impact on the economic growth and the implications to the policy making in China. Let me first point 3 facts and the population and about the population and its impact on China's economic growth. Fact 1, there are 2 turning points in China's population transition. The first one occurred in 2010, characterized by the peak of and afterwards a decline in working age population aged between 15 and 59. That's a working age population decline. The second turning point is expected to occur this year. Namely, total population in China will peak and turn to decline afterwards. That's fact 1. two turning points of population. Factor 2, the decline of working age population has resulted in slowdown of economic growth, labor shortage, slower improvement of human capital, diminishing return on capital investment, and narrowed room for reallocating resources, that is slower productivity growth, has all led to the decline in potential growth rate of GDP, followed by the slowdown of actual growth. That is what has happened in the past decade after 2010. Factor 3, the predicted negative growth of total population will bring about demand side shock to the Chinese economy. First, the shrinking population means less consumers. Second, older people in China tend to consume less. Third, slower GDP growth, therefore slower income growth, leads to slower growth of consumption. Finally, wider income gap tends to increase saving instead of consumption. So that's three facts about the population in China. Then let me turn to discuss the policy implication of such changes. There have been some policies implementing to address the challenges, including fertility policy relaxation, social security system building, transformation of economic growth pattern, and others. Fertility policy has been gradually relaxed through a whole gradual process, from a strict one-child policy to allow couples, both being only child, to have 2 children. Then to allow couples with one being only child to have 2 children. Then eventually allow all couples to have 2 children and then 3 children policy. However, the Chinese families have so far responded to the policy changes not so enthusiastically. Total fertility rate is as low as 1.3, and the population growth rate in this last year was close to 0. So fertility policy is shifting to reduce costs of raising children. For example, to open more daycare centers and kindergartens, to allow longer maternity leave, and so on and so forth. As for the elderly support system, it has been strengthened from various aspects. First is to increase social pension coverage of the elderly. In addition to already existing work-based pension scheme, residence-based pension program has been built to cover all rural and urban residents without formal employment. Second is to make the 3-pillar system work, namely basic social pension program, work unit-based annuity, and the voluntary personal insurance programs. There are pilot programs being conducted for the latter with income tax deferral. Third is to finance and provide better services for the elderly, such as job training, retraining, employment assistance programs, more nursing houses, and the community daycare centers, and so forth. Finally, let me discuss, under the new phase of demographic transition, how will Chinese economy grow in the next decade or so. As general law and experiences everywhere show, population trend is irreversible. Thus, to sustain economic growth at a reasonable pace requires further reforms to tap the growth potentials from both supply and demand sides. There is a big list of reforms that can generate a dividend, namely to increase the economic growth rate. Here, I'll just give one example to elaborate how reforms can generate dividend from both supply side and demand side. In China, we have two urbanization scenarios. One is de facto urbanization, and another de jure urbanization. That is, the rural to urban migrant workers work and live in cities, but they do not have urban resident registration. They don't have a legitimate residence in China, which makes them temporary guest workers, but not permanent residents with equal access to basic public services. We call this policy the hukou system. By abolishing the hukou system, we can expect to gain significant benefit to support the economic growth. One, labor supply is more stable. Two, resources reallocation process can be sustained, which can increase productivity. Three, the newcomers with equal provisions of public services will consume more. OECD China team estimated that when Chinese rural labor move to cities, their consumption increased by 30%. When, again, as a next step, when they become a registered urban resident, namely they get hukou, their consumption can increase by another 30%. Thus, that means we can gain the potentials for economic growth from both supply side, the potential growth rate, and demand side. So I stop here. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, merci. Donc, il y a en effet une...
Thank you, sir. Well, it is a very specific situation in China with that population that tends to decline, which is seen as an economic problem, whilst investment necessary for social welfare and for the economy are important in size. So the fact that this question is being raised, should we reform the system, in particular of internal migration within China. I'll turn to you, Pandu SJAHRIR. If we look at Indonesia, would you say that some of the challenges are the same as for China, or not at all?
Maybe a bit different. Maybe just to share my 5 minutes about Indonesia. Some of you may know, some of you may not know. I'm Pandu. My background is an investor. We invest across Southeast Asia, but Indonesia is our main focus. Indonesia, for some of you that may not know, is the 4th largest country in the world, 10th largest in GDP by purchasing power parity. And this year we are privileged to host the G20 event this November in Bali. I think most of you know more about Bali than Indonesia, but Bali is part of Indonesia. But before I start a little bit about Indonesia, I also wanted to address my condolences to our friends in Japan from the passing of Prime Minister Abe. I think what happened today was a big shock to all of us who has a belief that free speech and free thoughts should be an essential part of our rights. So when something as tragic as something that happened today, we can only say condolences to our friends in Japan, and hopefully that Japan itself can recover as a nation state. But moving on, may be different than China. We're about a decade behind in terms of economic growth, but we are actually at an inflection point. We have a very young population, 26 years old on average. So that's about 70–75% are very young. We are growing at 5.5% this year and maybe another 5% next year. Inflation is low, relatively 4%. So we're actually at a reverse situation. And having this young population economists like to call it demographic bonus. I like to call it, yes, it's a bonus in the short term, but in the medium term, it can also be a big risk to us, right, as a country. So there's a couple of things that is shared between us and French that maybe some of you know, some of you not know. We are growing economic ties between Indonesia and France. This year alone in defense, we will be buying, I think, 42 jets from France, right? I think that totals over $30 billion of investment. We're buying 3 submarines from France, which I think is good because the Australian can no longer buy, so hopefully this helps. And then number 2, we're also buying more satellites because we believe telecommunication is becoming more important. And lastly, in the last meeting a week ago in the G7 between your president and our president, we want to focus on energy transition. So we've already focused after the COP26, if I'm not mistaken here, COP21, 5–6 years ago in Paris, Indonesia has declared that it will be net zero carbon by 2050. So we are moving from fossil fuel into renewable energy. So this is also a big discussion that is happening, and hopefully there are more economic and businesses that we can do together. So obviously defense is a beginning, and hopefully second, in the short to medium term, we'll have more investment in renewable energy. And if there's renewable, there's 3 things. One is nuclear. I know you're a big proponent of nuclear. But number 2 and 3, which I think will be attainable, will be in solar and hydro, which will be a big focus of us. So maybe just to wrap or just focus on a discussion on demographic, one of the big risks that we have is related to education, especially in STEM. So I met one of the main architect of French 2030, Mr. Bruno from your government, and his focus really is how to have 1 million more engineers the next decade. Similar to us, we also probably need more, about 2 million engineers the next 10 years. So when you talk about this, what we need to do in short term is a free movement of high quality talents to come in and out of our country, free visa, help in tax, so people can work in short term. Number 2 is transfer of knowledge. So a lot of our discussion this last 3 days, I've been in Paris, talking to businesses, is how can each of us invest, move talent into this part, into Indonesia, where we're, I think, about a decade behind too, in terms of research and everything. So we have a lot to learn from France, especially in the area of AI, artificial intelligence, and deep tech. So in the very short term, free movement of human capital. And in the medium term, will be a lot more focus and capital in R&D in our universities. So this is going to be a structural discussion on education. So, you know, I don't want to take too much because I think for a lot of you is that, okay, Indonesia is a big country, very young population. Thank you for doing business, and hopefully we can do more business together. But number 3 also, Indonesia is also a place of opportunity for all of you. Not just in terms of economic, but also in terms of culture, and also in terms of the way we do things. I think last thing I want to close my my initial remarks is that we're not very different between Indonesia and France. We're people of ideas. We really believe in the ideals of ideas. We're full democratic countries. Thankfully, right now, our president, President Joko Widodo, Jokowi, we have about a 95% on the parliament and also 80% on popularity rating. And I think he's today very much loved by our people. And we're going to have election in 2 years, so hopefully whoever replaces him next will also be equally loved. So I'll close on that, and thank you for having me. This is my first time, and you have such a beautiful city here, so I really want to thank you for your kind hospitality.
Merci à vous, merci d'être là.
Thank you for being here. And you know that at the Rencontres we have a lot of young talents. We have young yellow vests and blue vests, and we have a lot of people who will be interested in what you're saying. But you're about to take away our young talents. You want to hire them, but that's actually all the better in a way, because it's a land of opportunity, definitely. The difficulty of aging China, but also of the lack of youth, and also a lot of the youth that we have in Indonesia, because they lack skills. This is actually what is at stake here. I will give the floor now to Paolo ARTINI, and we are going to talk about another dimension of democracy that shapes the world, that is actually very much present in the media. That's the question of refugees and the movement of forced movements of population. Thank you very much. I see that the demographic shock actually creates a upheaval in the world, but also for the refugees, and that creates actually a lot of movements. There's a lot of forced displaced people. So I will now talk about this third variable, namely migration, but not really as well, because I'll talk about those that have to move away because of violence, persecution, and war. I will start with some figures to give you an idea and to give you the context of the problem. Before the World Day of Refugees, that was the 20th of June, we published a report on the world trends of forced displacement. And the figure shows that we are now at 89 million people that are displaced, that are displaced by force. So that's a lot of people. That's actually 1 out of 88. That's actually 8%. I'm talking about 2021 year to year, as opposed to 2020. And in 10 years, the figure has doubled. It's twofold. So you can see the progression of displaced people that are displaced by force. We have refugees among them that left their country. We talk about 27 million people that are refugees in the world. We also have a lot of large states that are hosting refugees, like Turkey, Colombia, Pakistan, Uganda, and so on. But also, we have countries of origin. 2/3 of people come from 5 main countries of origin: Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Syria. These are the 5 countries of origin that actually generate the most refugees in the world. We have a question off mic. Sorry, the interpreter couldn't hear. That is very important, because we're talking about 2021. I'm reaching now to 2022 because we have the Ukrainian crisis. But we'll stick now for a small period of time on the demography of forced displaced people in 2021. And after that, we have those that are actually displaced within a country. And we're talking about 53 million people. So we can see the upheavals, the problems in Myanmar, the confrontation in Israel, the conflicts in Ethiopia, that actually creates movements of populations. But it is true, the world has changed. In 2022, we have had the fastest crisis with refugees, displaced people, and that was actually the fastest since the Second World War. And further to this crisis, we reached May 2022, and we actually had more than 5 million people that were displaced by force in the world. That's actually a huge, a significant number of people. It's a symbolic figure. And we shouldn't forget that the Ukrainian war has had an impact on other crises in Afghanistan, in Africa, with the increase of prices of foodstuffs, and first necessity goods. So we have had a huge number, a huge increase of forced displaced people. But we have a combination of all these factors. We also had the pandemic, but also the climate crisis. This is combined with the forced displaced people, and this actually exacerbates the phenomenon. In the East Africa, for instance, we have a huge problem of drought, but also, and actually that entails also a food problem, a food safety problem. So there's a combination of factors that continue to gain momentum, and that actually entails an increase of forced displaced people. As was said, if the international community doesn't do anything to solve the conflict, to find solutions, then this will increase. This problem will be even more important, more severe. And so this is a very big problem, and a lot of humanitarians are facing with this challenge right now and trying to tackle this problem. Whilst waiting to find the solutions to solve the conflict, what are the governance instruments to tackle the problem of refugees and immigration? I will start with the Declaration of New York from 2016, because with this declaration, adopted by the UNGA, we have an impact on refugees, but also on migration. The World Pact on Refugees is very important because it is based upon the Geneva Convention of '51, but also it talks about the necessity to share responsibilities. Because let's not forget that the great majority of refugees come from countries that are developing countries with low income, mid-income, and most of refugees, they come from countries that are neighboring countries where there's a crisis. And so we have to share responsibility, but also funding. There's not only financial support that is necessary. We could also share responsibility in terms of legal remedies, for instance, to help them settle down in other places, to find a first asylum, for instance, because a lot of places are under pressure. We should actually find a place in a third state country. We have the Agency for Refugees that actually made some forecasts for 2023, and they said that 2 million refugees that are the most vulnerable ones that should actually move away and find a new settlement. It's actually a 36% increase as opposed to 2022. So a huge increase. And then we also have a matter of legal remedies in terms of labor mobility, for instance. These are complementary measures. We also can have private sponsorship or mentorship. In Canada, we use that a lot. We can also have humanitarian corridors. France uses it, but also university corridors for the possibility for countries from first asylum to go to France to continue their study at a higher level, to have access to masters. This is a complementary measure that actually can be a symbol that it can embody solidarity, but we also have bad governance, or non-governance, or lack thereof, actually. We have a lot of phenomena that are of concern to all of us. First, the weaponization of refugees, if we use them as tools for geopolitical reasons, or when we outsource the responsibility in terms of asylum processing measures. We say we want to protect the refugees, but we say, oh no, it's not us, it's another country that should deal with it. Or if we also have a lot of red tape, and then we push them back at the border by doing so for administrative reasons or others. So, in terms of governance, there are solutions, but there's also a lot of challenges. I will wrap up now by talking about one of the solutions. A lot of countries have understood that the best solution to manage the problem of refugees is to have social inclusion through work. Access to employment is of paramount importance. It is an engagement, a commitment that concerns everyone. And that shows how important it is when we give access to work for refugees, that can actually bring an added value, diversity, loyalty for companies. And that's very important. But that's also the objective of the World Pact on Refugees, is to reinforce autonomy, empowerment, to empower the refugees. And I would like to insist upon this point. The sharing of responsibilities in terms of solidarity, but also the importance of freeing up the potential of refugees to contribute positively to the host country. Thank you. We can see how these are all intrinsically linked. We have the political aspect, we have the economy, we also have the demography. And I will now give the floor to Martine VASSAL, who will talk about a more local point of view. And we'll see how the region, which is at the very heart of a ecosystem where we have a lot of demographic discrepancies, if we can see from this side of the Mediterranean or the other side of the Med Sea, we can see how this region can actually profit from this situation. Well, the answer to your question, the issue of democratic shock, will it actually help with, will it actually harm the balance of the world? I could say yes, because we have a lot of crises coming up. There are social crises, health crisis, or climate crisis. And if we do nothing, tomorrow the old continents will disappear to the benefit of others, or some people will impose their way of life. So it is of crucial importance for us to act as an institution to make sure that things go as smoothly as possible. We can see now that in our territory, but also in France, the population is aging. Okay, we're getting old, and for a longer period of time, so it's all the better. We are helped for this, we get assistance, but behind this, the mass of people working is decreasing, the working population is decreasing. In our region, it's a bit different, because we're lucky in the Bouches-du-Rhône region to have a young population as a result of immigration flows, but we also have a geostrategic positioning that allows us to have, in the Med region, to have ties with the African continent, and that allows us also to anticipate things and to work with the African continent. And we are all today engaged in this because we think that if tomorrow, on top of all the shocks, may it be the climate shock and the others that will increase all the issues that we have to face, we'll have more and more people leaving their country to go to countries where we have water, where we can eat, and where we can live normally. And I'm talking about, I'm not talking about working, I'm talking about surviving here. And this is why we have woven ties, cultural ties, and these have been woven for many years, because here we have a lot of young people coming from immigrants. A small part is also born here. In Marseille, we have 70 consular posts. That shows how many ties we have with different countries. And we have more than 37 nationalities that are represented in our territory. So that shows that we are a full-fledged melting pot. And that's actually part and parcel of our culture. We also have a role as a metropole to actually have a gateway with Africa, to help Africa, because we're very far away from China and we're a bit far away from Indonesia, but we're very close to the African continent. And as such, we also have the duty to help the African continent to develop itself. And we had a summit which was quite interesting, a Europe-Africa summit in our region, and the Prime Minister of Senegal explained to us the following. She said that she wished our craftsmen, our doctors, to go to Africa to explain to the African population what they should do to develop their country. And that is what is important, is we need to have this link, this connection. And we need to help the young people, but also the companies, to have a wider market. And when we help and assist Africa, we actually help the youth of the future. We help the world, because if they can go away from their home country, they can ship away. When they go through the Med Sea, and they risk dying in dire when they actually go on dire boats. That shows that there's a problem in Africa, because there's a problem to solve. But we need to have structures also that allow us to say to them, we can help them, that we can help them. And this is what is important. We need to have this connection. And I'm delighted that you are here today, because you can be our institutional spokesman. We are very much willing to help, and we want to help those that are on the other side of the Med Sea, not only for training, because this is something we can do, for sure, but also in the matter of way of life, because when on the other side of the Med Sea we have an urbanized city where there's no sanitation structure and everything is spilled in the sea, then it comes over to our side of the Med Sea. And so this is why we need to be in close connection. We need to have gateways. We need to have bridges, but in dual circulation. Not only for us to go and find some places to settle our factories or companies, but they could also come over to capitalize upon our knowledge and skills. We have a lot of things to do, we have a lot of ties, and we have to multiply them with China. China is also part and parcel of our plans for the future, because China's population is reducing in a much faster way than us, and that shows us the path that we shouldn't follow, because if we continue to have an aging population, then unfortunately we'll reach a point where we will not be able to pay social benefits of the elderly of our country. And the system is well done, and it's done in such a way that working population pays for the elderly. But if we do not have young people and a working population that is enough in size, then we cannot pay for the elderly. So at the world scale, and not only at the microscopic scale of our territories, we have to help those that want to develop themselves, and allow ourselves to have a continuum and to make sure that our children can have a choice. And I insist on this. Our children, our grandchildren should have the choice to stay on their home soil or to live elsewhere. And we should have ties that should be closer and closer. We work with a lot of young people. We have some counselors from the metropole that work with us. They are our future. They are here to help us in our decision-making process because, you know, making decision takes time. But our duty is also to work with people that we say are actually senior and that they are the golden age, so to say. This is the way we call it. The senior age group, they have made a contribution to the society and we should help them. It is our duty to help them then on. And we'll have more and more of them and we'll have to pay for their welfare. It's a challenge that we should face all together in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, but also with the US. They cannot stand on their own, actually. They will certainly face the same challenge as us. Thank you. We still have a bit of time to answer questions. So you can raise your hands and we'll give you a mic. There was a first question that was asked by Jean Wang on the chat box. I hesitate to mention it, but what is the right balance? It's hard. That's a tough question, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know who will answer that. But when we talk about demography, it seems that we never strike the right balance. Either we have too many immigrants, either we have a population that is too young or too old. And when I listen to this discussion, I think that you were quite realistic and quite pragmatic in the way you spoke. It seems that this is something we can manage. The perceptions are very often dramatic, but we may have a different vision of this situation, may it be from the public or the private sector. We will actually listen to all questions at once, and then you will answer them, because we do not have a lot of time. Thank you very much for this conference. It's very interesting. I will hurry up. I have a question for Mr. Artini regarding the migratory crisis. It seems to worsen and worsen as time flies, especially when we hear your figures. What about the institutions? What do they do about it? What is the power of the United Nations? What is the power of the European Union? How about all these groups of nations? Is it only one country that can decide how they will manage a group of migrants coming in? Or is there an institution that can regulate these flows and these crises, and that are actually able to solve this problem in and out? I have a question. Shouldn't we find the right balance by talking to women? I have read, but I would like to have your opinion about it. If we work on women's education, first of all, they tend to have less children, and if they are educated, they work, so that actually help for the growth, the economic growth, and that actually help finding the right balance, and that would solve the problem of the demography, and help out with the economic growth issue. I have a question that actually goes far and beyond what the scope of this discussion, but I hope you will certainly answering. How about theoretical studies to anticipate? When we know that there's a huge demographic density and a restricted farmland size, like in India, and we should also talk about and think about water scarcity to try to anticipate migration flows. Of course, This will not be done overnight, but this is a research for the Cercle des Économistes and the young people as well. I will encourage you to do so, because India is the country where we have the smallest useful farmland site. And if you combine this with water scarcity, we'll definitely have migration. I read it in a newspaper that we all know about. When there's no more water, then people walk away. And one day they will become refugees, you know. This is something that was unthinkable 10, 20 years ago. And now we can see it. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, we'll definitely face this challenge. And we can't say, oh, we didn't have the right tools to anticipate this. None of us will have the means to settle that then. We should start thinking about it right now. Because otherwise, in 10, 15 years, we'll definitely have problems. We'll have climatic refugees. This is a concern. I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry. I would like each and every one of the panelists to answer the questions that were asked. Professor CAI, maybe you want to start and say a few words.
We have so many balance issues that actually are challenging, facing by us, both the society and the policymakers. One, for example, as I said previously, a big balance issue in China is the balance between supply side growth potential and demand side the supportive capability to the economic growth. Another balance is, as someone mentioned about the gender issue. In China, people tend not to have more children because there is a very big cost in raising families. So there is a balance or trade-off between career development and family development.
Merci.
I believe both the government policy and the society and even the entrepreneur can do something about it to give a better balance between the career and the family development.
Merci, professeur CAI. Je vous coupe. Merci beaucoup parce que j'aimerais que chaque...
I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but I would like each panelist to say a few words. Pandu, maybe you have the word. You have the floor. Quickly.
Every country, Indonesia included, France included, and for its citizens, I think the most important now, especially with the Ukraine war, is about energy security, food and water security. And this is very short-termist, but today now we realize this, right? And then third, obviously, the power of our citizens. Because at the end, even for me right now, whatever I'm doing today is simply a bridge to my younger brothers and sisters, those that are in their 20s and 30s. So whatever we do today, whatever our action we're doing today, is really for the benefit of them. We are simply a bridge for each of our society. So this discussion has been so helpful and amazing. Just want to thank all of you for just sharing this, and hopefully we can make new friends. Thank you.
Merci pour cette très belle image du pont. Paolo.
Thank you for this bridge symbol. To strike the right balance, we have to understand that we have an imbalance in the world, first of all. We have to provide assistance for all crises, not only in Ukraine. We shouldn't forget the other crises, the refugees, for instance. The state, the institutions can do something, and the war in Ukraine showed that with the activation of temporary protection with solidarity platforms, we can find solutions. Martine VASSAL was talking about solidarity is possible also. We can find solutions. And something that would need to be substantiated is also we need to anticipate the displaced people. There are factors that can be the subject of studies to see if there are tensions between farmers, the matter of water scarcity. This is something that is very important to prepare, to anticipate the future displacements. A few words for the end. That's a huge burden on my shoulders. It's not really a solution for that women should all be educated in brackets, because they are very much educated and natality is decreasing because they are studying, their children, they get their children when they're older. So the balance to find is very hard to strike. I don't think we can determine a balance today. I think we should actually have good practices and we need to apply them now. We should be role models on a daily basis. And this is very important, the acceptance of others in their differences, to accept the others in the way they are different. And sometimes we do that on very futile aspects for culture, for instance, for cultural aspects. Weaving cultural ties with different countries is actually a matter of building bridges and gateways that can help overcome these difficulties. And this is where we have a problem. This is the challenge of tomorrow. For those that are on their home soil, they might want to stay. We are working on our territory on something on energy sovereignty and food sovereignty. We want to avoid generating greenhouse gases, and we want people that are on their home soil to be independent. And that's not the case today. So I think that the percentage is hard. And I actually have faith in the United Nations. I think the United Nations should be the bridge between all the nations in the world. We should all have the willingness to take profit from these good practices. I'm sorry we're running out of time. It's fascinating. We couldn't answer all the questions, but let's actually use the opportunity of the Rencontres Économiques to dwell upon these questions. Thank you very much.